What happens when ChatGPT is wrong? I did an experiment the other day. I asked, can you pull information from a URL and summarize it? It assured me that it could, so I pointed it at a beefy article on StephenWolfram.com called What is ChatGPT and How Does It Work? It gave me a fine, if not somewhat generic summary of the article, but it got me thinking this could be a really useful way of summarizing articles that I've written. So I pointed it to a free write that I had composed in 2010 and asked it to summarize. It came back with, the URL you provided is a personal blog post, good so far, titled The Urge to Create Something Meaningful, good so far, by a writer named Josh Kaufman. I hadn't heard of Josh Kaufman before. Apparently he's the author of a book called The Personal MBA. I spent a bunch of time Googling Josh Kaufman, and he never wrote anything called The Urge to Create Something Meaningful. For some reason, ChatGPT thinks that Josh Kaufman wrote that blog post. So I was just curious about why the confusion and began to ask it questions. Actually, I should say, first I corrected it. In an apologetic tone, it said it had gotten confused with another website that it had read. So I poked it a little bit more to better understand where the confusion lay. The answer was frustratingly nebulous. It affirmed that it had in fact scanned the article, but that it uses a sort of pattern matching statistical process that means that it doesn't have a perfect understanding of the details. It suggested that the confusion might have come because of similarities with the writing style and topics. So this was very curious to me. Why did it think Josh Kaufman had written this article? And then it dawned on me, maybe ChatGPT hadn't actually scanned the article, even though it told me it had. So I asked it to tell me the first word of the article, and it said it was creativity. But that's not the first word of the article. So I asked it what the publication date of the article was, and it said January 16th, 2015. But that's not the publication date of the article. When I asked it why it thought that the publication date was January 16th, 2015, it said, because that's what's published on the article, which it wasn't. When I told it that wasn't the date on the article, it then told me there was no explicit publication date on the article. When I told it that yes, in fact, it does have a publication date, it went back to claiming that the date was January 16th, 2015. Clearly, it was just making stuff up. So I called it out. I said, are you sure you're actually scanning that URL, or are you just guessing? And finally, the jig was up. It confessed of its sins. As an AI language model, I am not capable of browsing the web, but instead rely on text input provided to me by the user. Earlier, I had mistakenly provided incorrect information regarding the presence of an explicit publication date and the first word of the article. I apologize for any confusion this may have caused. To answer your most recent question, I can confirm that the first word of the article, the urge to create something meaningful on plasticmind.com, is indeed creativity. I apologize for any earlier confusion caused by my responses. So, in conclusion, it apologized for giving me incorrect information about the publication date of the article and the first word of the article, and then it ends by giving me another wrong answer. My best guess as to what happened is that it looked at that URL, it grabbed the slug, that last part of it with the hyphens in it, and it kind of blew that out into an article title and then made something up that sounded like it fit that particular article title. That's one of the things that ChatGPT is really good at, making stuff up. The moral of the story is this, and if you've been paying any attention to AI, this is not going to come as a surprise to you, but I think it's an anecdote that illustrates a point that's worth sharing more broadly. AI tools are good at being creative, they're good at being compelling, they're good at being confident, but they're very often completely wrong. So please, be careful out there.